They don't see a future for themselves in this country in terms of being able to afford a house, be able to get married and have children. So young Democrats who were very much galvanized by Mamdani's message were not put off by his message of socialism. They liked it.
It was a true Democratic blue wave, one of the best nights the Democrats have had in years. But the centrists, the media, and especially MAGA supporters aren't taking it well. On Abby Phillips' show, where Sarah Seidner was filling in, a panel discussion captured all the reactions. The guests included MAGA pundit Ben Shapiro and Anna Kasparian from the Young Turks. We'll break down what they had to say about this massive night for the Democrats, and for Zohran Mamdani in particular. I'll also share my own thoughts as we dive into Ben Shapiro, Anna Kasparian, and the rest of the panel on Abby Phillips' show. Let's get into it.
Democrats are doing something rare these days. They're celebrating big wins across several states. Republicans are now in the blame game. A blue wave swept across the country in key races last night. Voters sent a direct message to President Trump, voting in big numbers for Democrats up and down the ballot and electing candidates across the party's ideological spectrum. It was the first major electoral test of Trump's second term, and he's not too happy with what happened. He spent his day outwardly running through what could be described as the classic stages of grief.
If you want to see what congressional Democrats wish to do to America, just look at the result of yesterday's election in New York, where their party installed a communist as the mayor.
All we want is voter ID. You go to a grocery store, you have to give ID. You go to a gas station, you give ID. But for voting, they want no voter ID. It's only for one reason, because they cheat.
Let's see how a communist does in New York. We're going to see how that works out. And we'll help him. We'll help him.
The shutdown was a big factor, negative for the Republicans.
But some Republicans, including his vice president, are shrugging off the wins. J.D. Vance saying it would be idiotic to overreact to a couple of elections in blue states, and House Speaker Mike Johnson echoing that sentiment.
There's no surprises. What happened last night was blue states and blue cities voted blue. We all saw that coming. And no one should read too much into last night's election results. Off-year elections are not indicative of what's to come. That's what history teaches us.
All right, we have a great panel here. I want to start with this idea because I was thinking about it as everyone has been talking about where the Democrats are going, looking across these races. So I guess the question, and I'll start with you, Bakari, why can't the Democratic Party be both Mamdani, and who is an outward democratic socialist, he says it himself, and Spanberger, who is more moderate? Why can't that be the Democratic Party and stop saying, like, we're going to be this or this?
I mean, I think the Democratic Party is that, what you said, and it is a big tent, and that tent does have those somewhat, as you kind of dictated in your question, extremes. But I also want to push back on the framing of that, because that framing is more in line with what J.D. Vance was talking about. That framing is more in line than what Donald Trump was talking about. Somehow people perceive that this was an election that just happened in New York City. And God forbid to all my New Yorkers that life happens outside of there. But the fact is, we kicked Republicans' ass not just in New York, but we beat them in Mississippi, where we actually broke the supermajority. 2 public service commissioners won, not 1, but 2 statewide in Georgia. We beat the last Republican city council person in Orlando, Florida. We actually took back the mayoral race in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So not only did we just win in Virginia and New Jersey and New York, where people want to make this race about, we won up and down the ballot. Now, is this just a snapshot of time? Maybe. I don't want to get out over my skis, but let's not make it seem like we just won in blue places. Right. We won all over the country.
Ben, to you, are Republicans missing something here? Because you are hearing some Republicans who are saying, this is not a big deal. This just happened, as you just heard, in blue states. Everybody just calm down.
Well, I mean, I think that this is the launch of the midterm election cycle, obviously. And as Bakari says, Republicans did not do well last night. And it's also true, obviously, that Democrats were very likely to win Virginia or New Jersey or New York. But obviously, if Republicans don't take into account the fact that this is now a Republican-owned economy, and that this is a Republican-run country. I mean, the Republicans do run both houses of Congress and the presidency. And so if there's a backlash, it's going to obviously happen to the Republicans. And that is always the most likely scenario. I mean, I think that the question is going to be margins. Right now, there aren't that many vulnerable seats, actually, in the House. The number of challengeable seats is extremely limited. So I don't think you're going to get a wave that's 40, 50 seats, because I'm not sure that's possible anymore, given redistricting and given the big sort that's been happening. But for Republicans not to take some alarm at the fact that obviously these exit polls, which are showing economy still as the number one concern and inflation still as the number one concern, if they don't take that seriously, obviously there are going to be some serious effects in the midterm.
There are 2 points I want to make along the same lines that Ben was making. This probably will be the only time we agree.
I was like, y'all are agreeing on something?
Start off with a bang here. But yes, we have to think about the fact that, take Virginia, for example. Every single county in Virginia swung to the left. Every single county, not just one. And we're talking about 2, 3, 4, sometimes 15, 16 points swung to the left. In Georgia, what you saw around Atlanta, Fulton County, Gwinnett, Cobb, I mean, those folks came out to vote. And so you're starting to see those things. And last but not least, the issues that were at the forefront, and Democrats have to realize this, the issues that were at the forefront, like you said, were the economy, affordability, one. Number two, health care. A distant third was immigration. You know what was not in those top 5 or 6 issues? These culture wars,
Yes.
which Donald Trump pulls us down in, and we can never win them.
And usually I think the Democratic Party takes the bait, and this time around they didn't. So I think the Virginia governor's race is a good example of that. You know, you have Winsome Earl Sears kind of focusing part of her campaigning on the transgender issues. Spanberger didn't focus on that, and she did focus on affordability, and I think it helped her win that gubernatorial race. But I will say this, you know, I'm glad that Ben is pointing out to the fact that, yes, economy is top of mind for most Americans. And what I heard from House Speaker Mike Johnson and from Vice President J.D. Vance is a lot of what I heard from Democrats in the lead up to the 2024 presidential election, when immigration was definitely something that Americans were concerned about, and crime. And they pretended like, nope, doesn't exist. It's all made up. It's just right-wing fear-mongering. No, you need to listen to your constituents, because your constituents are the ones who are concerned about it.
Well, in fairness, I don't think the vice president or the speaker of the House were saying these issues don't matter or they don't exist. That certainly isn't what they were saying. They're explaining that it's an off-year election and that Republicans didn't necessarily feel the same impetus to go vote as we likely are going to see in the next presidential election and certainly in the midterms coming up next year. So I think that's a bit of a mischaracterization.
Well, Trump is underwater when it comes to pretty much everything, including immigration, by the way. But Larry Kudlow today was shocked at how underwater he is when it comes to the economy. 61% of Americans disapprove of Trump's handling of the economy. Don't underestimate how much of an impact that's going to have on the midterm elections.
And even the voters that, you know, the fraction of black male voters that people were looking at in the 2024 election, you know, all those voters came back home. And the biggest flop you saw last night, or flip-flop, however the word is said, was Hispanic voters. Yeah. So all the gains, it looks like every gain that Republicans made in 2024 through immigration policy reform that people don't like what they're seeing on TV or whatever it may be, they lost all of that last night. Now again, Democrats, one of the things we like to do is run victory laps that last like 365 days. I mean, you have to figure this out, because this isn't the only headline today. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but we're literally in 36 days of a shutdown. And people are extremely, they're hurting right now. And that hurt was what we saw in the election last night.
Barry Sears makes a solid point about Hispanic voters, something I was just discussing with a friend yesterday. It's hard to understand why any Hispanic voter who once supported Trump would still back him now, especially after all the incidents involving ICE. Just recently, there was a story about ICE agents ramming a Hispanic woman's Mercedes, sending her to the hospital, and she's a U.S. citizen now planning a major lawsuit. So really, what Hispanic person would support Trump at this point? It's baffling. What also frustrates me is how the media, like Sarah Seidner here, frames these discussions. She presents it as if the Democrats need to balance the so-called radical left voices like Zohran Mamdani with moderates or establishment figures, as if the party can't function without its corporate, centrist core. But when do you ever hear that about Republicans? When do you hear the media say, why can't the GOP have both the far-right MAGA types and the more reasonable centrist conservatives? You never do. The expectation to constantly moderate only applies to Democrats. The moment they move even slightly left of center, suggesting maybe the government should actually do something to help its own people, it's portrayed as extreme. Meanwhile, Republicans can swing as far right as they please, and the media rarely calls them out or demands balance. It's maddening. Now, as for Ben Shapiro, while I disagree with nearly everything he says, I'll admit he's not entirely detached from reality here. He acknowledges rightly that this is Trump's economy, the Republicans' economy. The White House can't just keep blaming Joe Biden every time something goes wrong, claiming they're still dealing with Biden's numbers. Even Ben seems to understand, as Kasparian pointed out, that Trump's approval ratings are underwater across nearly every category, even on crime, where he's doing slightly better but still in the negative. Economically, it's disastrous for him, and overall, his approval is at its lowest since taking office. We saw a similar dynamic in the 2018 midterms when Democrats performed incredibly well, and it looks like history might repeat itself in 2026. Ben Shapiro, for all his partisanship, seems to recognize that Republicans will ultimately be held accountable by voters for the state of the economy and everything that comes with it.
The biggest thing in all of this, and I think you saw it, Trump winning over Biden, I think that you're seeing it now, is that people don't like the status quo. And after they change the status quo, they don't like the new status quo. Because the reality is that all these problems that are now deeply embedded in very real ways in our economy, for example, things like the national debt, things like the fact that we've had, enormous pressing by the Federal Reserve for a while here, and in both directions. First, it was too slow to react in one direction, then it was too slow to react in the other direction. All of this is leading to just a systemic unease that everyone has with everything. And whoever gets elected next, good luck to Zohran Mamdani, because he's not going to be able to solve all the issues that he is talking about, certainly not with the policies that he is currently proposing. And then he's going to be the one on the chopping block.
I do want to ask you, Anna, because young people voted in very large numbers, particularly in the mayoral race here in New York, and they were part of the change that happened here with Zohran Mamdani sort of sweeping into office with over 50% of the vote. But I want to talk about what we've been hearing from the president and some others in the Republican Party who keep calling him not a socialist, democratic socialist, which he has said he is, but a communist. And there are big differences between the two. That scare tactic did not work when it comes to Mamdani. And socialism, some people will look at it and say, look, we have some socialist programs here in the United States, things like Medicaid and Medicare, things like, the SNAP program, things like public school, where we all pay taxes, but even if you don't have kids get to go
compulsory program.
To school for free. What sort of is the idea that Republicans have that this is a communist and that they can keep pushing this idea when people
certainly
seem to be rejecting it?
Look, there is a fundamental difference between outright socialism, where the government seizes the means of production and tries to artificially control the market, which we've seen many, many times play out throughout human history, and social welfare programs. Having social welfare programs available in a country does not inherently make your society a socialist society. Right. Just last night, we talked about the thriving economies over the last several years of Scandinavian countries like Norway, Sweden, Denmark, that on the economic index freedom scale are actually more capitalist than the United States of America, have far more free market opportunities for people who live there than even we do here in the United States. Where I think there is a valid criticism, and what's going to be interesting to see if this can even play out here in New York City, are these very radical ideas with extreme expansion in government, stuff like state-run grocery stores or taking over housing here in New York City specifically with the decommodification, as we saw specifically campaigned for by Zohran Mamdani on the campaign trail, where the government will plan to go in and purchase private housing in the quest to make housing more affordable here in the United States. I think that's an interesting policy idea. It certainly is prescribing the wrong solution, but for an accurate complaint, right? People are struggling to afford life here in Manhattan and around our country. We all reasonably should be coming to the table with solutions for this, but is more government involvement the solution? Time and time again throughout human history, the answer has been no, and I think we have the scorecard to prove that.
This isn't about decommodification.
It's about rent freezes.
No, it's not even about that.
Well, there was an ad put out by Mamdani advocating for that, so I think let's be honest.
Let's be extremely honest about what this is. Republicans had Barack Obama, who is now a little long in the tooth, and he's on the sideline. They had Kamala Harris, who is now recuperating from a race. They had Joe Biden, right? They do extremely well with picking a boogeyman out, and that is what they're doing. We cannot fall for that. They're simply otherizing Mamdani. They're saying whatever they want to say,
and it's not working though. That's the thing. Like the more they attack him, the more.
It's a refreshing.
What way is otherizing just responding to his own campaign
calling him a jihadist
promises?
When he's not a jihadist? That's a good example.
For every Zohran Mamdani, there is a Mary Sheffield, right? There is somebody else who you can see. She's the first black mayor of Detroit, Michigan, where young people came out in large swaths and voted for.
So then the question becomes why they're focusing on Mamdani. And I think the answer is because of Mamdani's own words. If you watched his victory speech last night, he used one line in particular that sort of leapt out and left off the screen when he said that there is literally no problem. This was his line. There is no problem too big for government to solve and no matter too small for government to care about. I mean, that's terrifying. What totalitarians would say, is that they're literally, and then the two people he quoted verbatim, aside from Mario Cuomo, which was I thought a delightful little slap at Andrew. I thought it was a little nasty. But he quotes Eugene V. Debs, who's a socialist, and then he quotes Nehru, another socialist, and then he says, "I am a socialist" from the stage. So saying that President Trump is somehow going overboard when he has campaigned as this, when the Democratic Socialists of America, which is a base from which he springs and to whom he answers in many ways, is openly socialist. He's not talking about He said on this network he hates capitalism. He said that on this network.
But the president's been calling him a communist, not a socialist.
Well, why don't you explain what you think that the difference is?
There's a big difference.
What is the difference?
99.99% of America did not watch his speech. 99% of America literally don't care who Eric Adams is or Cuomo is or who the mayor of New York is. But what is happening, though, is Democrats do something that we don't normally do, which is harness the energy of young people. And Zoran Mamdani had the issue that carried the day yesterday. Everything else, set aside everything else about how you feel. He talked about affordability in a way that communicated to voters and resonated. But Zoran Mamdani is a part of the future of the Democratic Party. He's not the face of the Democratic Party, or he is not the Democratic Party.
Well, something to also keep in mind is, calling him a socialist didn't hurt him in this election, because if you look at Democratic voters, many of whom live here in New York City, they are super skeptical of capitalism.
Sure.
Because of the crony capitalism they've been dealing with. They don't see a future for themselves in this country in terms of being able to afford a house, be able to get married and have children. So young Democrats who were very much galvanized by Mamdani's message were not put off by his message of socialism. They liked it. And that's something important to keep in mind.
But Republicans are not campaigning in New York against socialism. They are campaigning nationally against socialism. And what they're saying is that the Democrats, don't fall for the bait, is I guess what I'm saying to you guys. I shouldn't give you, I hope you fall for the bait, but don't fall for the bait of making Mamdani the face of your party, because the reality is that Abigail Spanberger won by a larger margin in Virginia than Zoran Mamdani won in New York last night. And by the way, he was running against another Democrat. Okay, that's how much he was disliked. Right? He's running Andrew Cuomo, who's a deeply unpopular person in New York.
He sure is.
Won 800,000 votes in that race last night because there were so many Democrats who didn't like Zoran Mamdani.
Right.
So this idea that Zoran Mamdani is overwhelmingly popular across the if you include a country that includes half of Republicans, not a city like New York, where perhaps 7 people are Republicans and 3 of them voted for Curtis Sliwa in the end. I'm sorry, it's not a representative sample. It's like saying that AOC is representative of the broad spectrum of American politics, and she isn't.
Ben Shapiro ends by claiming that AOC doesn't represent the American people, but he's completely wrong about that. In reality, AOC is one of the most popular political figures in the country. The mistake Republicans keep making is that they've been crying wolf for decades, labeling every Democrat, from Joe Biden to Barack Obama, as a socialist or a communist or whatever other ist they can think of. But Americans aren't falling for it anymore. People are looking at the Republicans, especially MAGA, and realizing that not only do they fail to make life better, they're actively making it worse. They're tearing down what little social safety net remains, while establishment Democrats often do little to fix things. So now voters are turning toward people like Zoran Mamdani, Bernie Sanders, and AOC, leaders who actually propose ideas that could improve lives. These aren't radical ideas. They're policies that already work in other developed countries. And when the right calls them socialists or communists, people are simply responding, so what? If their ideas make sense, voters will support them. Anna Kasparian made that point clearly. And Sarah Seidner deserves credit for trying to add nuance by explaining that socialism and communism aren't the same thing, even though the discussion got drowned out by everyone shouting. Seidner pointed out that Zoran Mamdani isn't a communist, despite Trump calling him that. He's a socialist. But Ben Shapiro brushed it off with, well, whatever those terms mean to you, as if the distinction doesn't matter. Deep down, he probably knows the difference. But to him, and many on the right, anything they dislike becomes socialism or communism. Republicans and MAGA supporters do this constantly. If it's something they already benefit from, like public schools, Medicare, or Social Security, it's not socialism. But propose something new like Medicare for all or tuition-free college, And suddenly, that's socialism. Democrats can't keep falling into the trap of distancing themselves from progressive ideas. They need to look at what just happened with Zohran Mamdani's success, and remember that Bernie Sanders remains the most popular politician in the country, with AOC not far behind. Their message, helping ordinary Americans instead of sending billions abroad or funding endless wars, resonates deeply. Most people don't care what label you put on it as long as it improves their lives. David Hogg said it best on Abby Phillips' show when Scott Jennings called him a socialist. I just want people to be able to get health care, whatever you want to call that. And honestly, that's how many of us feel. No one in America should go bankrupt because they got sick, or be unable to retire with dignity, or drown in student debt just to get an education. Yet Ben Shapiro, who doesn't even believe Social Security should exist, calls every policy that helps regular people socialism or communism. But Americans aren't buying it anymore. What do you think? Do you agree with Ben Shapiro's take? Or are you more in line with Anna Kasparian and Barry Sears? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.